Fabulous with Vips and Vicky. The ThinqShift podcast for professionals who aspire to be fabulous leaders. Those who not only succeed, but also purposefully seek to reinvent the world.
Welcome to episode 3 of Being Fabulous. In this episode, we describe what it means to be deliberate and why that's so important as one of our 4 Ds of being a fabulous leader. What you'll hear in this episode is why it's so important for a fabulous person to be deliberate, why it's just so hard, and finally, rookie errors at different stages of your career, whether you are the superstar performer, awesome manager, or top-notch executive. I know you're going to enjoy it.
Welcome to Be Fabulous episode 3. This episode is going to be all about being deliberate. But for those of you who may have missed the first 2 podcasts, amazing as it sounds, we're on episode 3. This is my sort of quick bring you up to speed on the last 2 podcasts. So we started out with this idea of fabulous people are the ones that have the greatest potential to be fabulous leaders who will not only succeed, be successful, make tons of money, so forth, but also reinvent the world. And because the world itself is getting faster, what that really means is success is more tied to one's ability to adapt than perhaps ever before in our history. So what does that actually mean? So adaptability is really saying that what's going to make us more successful is the speed at which we can learn and apply new things, new knowledge, as opposed to the number of years of experience we have doing whatever it is that we've done before. And that's quite a tricky thing to wrap your head around, because if you think of the professional environment for over a 50, 60, 70-year period, we generally work on the assumption that the more years of experience you have at something, the better you are at something. But what we're actually seeing is when the world moves faster and changes faster, it's actually the speed of adaptability which becomes more important. So the 4 Ds are traits, characteristics, wiring, if you like, that are most important for fabulous people in order for them to be adaptable. So we should be nurturing these most. So last episode, we dug in to the first one, which was be daring. Being daring was a key component of being adaptable. So today, we're digging deeper into the second one, which is being deliberate. So Vicky, tell us, why is being deliberate so important as it relates to being adaptable?
Well, Vips, when we think about being deliberate and you think about what it means, it's about doing things consciously and doing them intentionally. So we are choosing to take an action that may or may not be something we do naturally. It's something we're doing deliberately. And given the world is moving so quickly, as you just described, we have to consciously decide to rewire how we think about the world in order to show up differently. Or we'll keep doing what we always did before. So it has to be a conscious choice, or our default pattern is to do the thing we know how to do. And without that deliberate, intentional change of our behavior, nothing really is going to happen. And if we don't actually prioritize and make it important to us, we're always going to operate in the old way, which is going to make us feel like we're not quite living up to what's expected of us. And our imposter syndrome nemesis is going to creep in again and make us feel very, very unworthy.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I see that all the time. And, this comment, it made me think about a conversation you and I were having yesterday. And I think we were doing a seminar, and we used like a working out analogy. And it was funny because I think I was actually speaking to your personal trainer, funnily enough, about this topic. And it was at the end of the day, you can read everything there is to know about being healthy, being fit, eating well, meditating, breathing. Bill Gates's 27 tips for being uber successful, Warren Buffett's investment tips. But if you don't actually do the work, the reps, if you don't actually make the meals, then all that knowledge doesn't actually mean anything. It's, you may feel like you know everything, but you don't actually put any of it in practice. So this idea of thinking about being deliberate, it's almost like, I draw analogies to having stamina. The only real way to build muscle in something that's new is by doing more of it. Is that a fair place to go with that?
Yeah, it is. And it's not that easy because to build stamina in something that your brain is not designed to do requires you digging deep. It requires you having something bigger than yourself to think about, to understand how to rewire and do that to yourself, because it's not going to happen naturally. Like you said, I mean, I think gyms make their money on getting people to sign up and hoping that no one actually does sign up.
No, you want them to sign up. You want them to sign up. You just don't want them to attend.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. They have their model is based on oversubscription because
Yeah.
they know that most people actually aren't going to show up and do the work.
Yeah, it's a guilt subscription.
Yeah. And we all have these great intentions, but deciding to follow through is really, really hard. And that's why New Year's resolutions for most people are an absolute waste of time, because we say something, but by the time February 1 rolls around, whether it's the gym or eating healthy or whatever it might be, you just give up the will. It's just not that much fun because it's hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. February the 1st, though, you're being very optimistic. I think most of them die at the end of January.
Second week in January.
Yeah. I should probably share at this point, Vicky, that I did make a New Year's resolution this year, January the 1st. Um, and I'm wishing every single day I hadn't made this particular New Year's resolution. So this is the year I gave up drinking
Mm.
and being incarcerated at home, during our COVID crisis right now. It's like I could really do with a glass of wine, and but no, and you're right though, the stamina that's required, particularly when your normality has been shaken, it's hard. And I didn't drink much anyway. I used to have maybe a couple of drinks a week, kind of thing, max. But I can imagine how much harder it would be if that was if someone said, if it had been give up the coffee, yeah, no, forget it. I would have definitely fallen off that ladder by now.
Well, that's what you're talking about is those things are often used initially socially because they're enjoyable, but they really do become our coping strategies.
Yeah,
So what you're talking about with the pandemic and the period we're in right now, we can go for caffeine or alcohol or sugar or distraction or whatever our choice is, because it's easier than actually focusing on what's really, really important for our health and
yeah.
what's good for us. So it takes practice. So talk to us about why it's important from the work world to be deliberate. Why is that a valuable, and actually not just valuable, but an essential characteristic in order to be a fabulous leader?
Yeah. So the way I always think about this is that the way we think about, like, internally, I'm talking about the way we think about what constitutes success looks different. If we're in that first, whatever, 5 8 years of our career, where we are, what we call the journey to the superstar performer, then really we're mastering a craft. We're just getting good at whatever it is that we're trying to get good at. Okay, so success tends to look like getting good at something. Okay, so that's going to get a lot of deliberate practice. It's going to get a lot of muscle building. If you're a software developer, you're gonna get really good with frameworks and coding and JavaScript and whatever. If you're an accountant, you're going to get really good with double book entry. If you're a copywriter, you're going to get really good at writing. If you're a data scientist, you're going to get really good with regressions. So what we don't realize is that deliberate practice, those reps, if you like, are essentially creating habits and therefore self beliefs about what constitutes us being successful. Okay. And then what happens is, because we all want to earn more money and get promoted and all those wonderful things, then what happens is, either because we're desperate for it or the environment wants us to, we find ourselves getting promoted. We get promoted, and then what happens is we're on that journey to awesome manager. And now success looks different. If all you do is operate in your routines and habits that you develop for success as a superstar performer, and you try to apply them as awesome manager, you're going to go wrong.
Yeah, and it's one that I know particularly well. Um, Vips always smiles when we talk about this journey because it's one of these journeys that many of us will recognize. When you pride yourself on being that superstar performer and having that deep expertise, it's just easier to do it yourself. It's just easier to do it your way. When you have to figure out how to get something done through somebody else, you've never really had to do that before, Vips. You may have had to collaborate and work in teams, but actually trying to get another human being to get the outcome that's required and not tell them how to do it. When you pride yourself on your expertise and how to get things done in a very efficient way, and you may not even have thought through, well, how do I do that? It's one thing to be a deep expert, but real mastery comes from going beyond expertise and understanding how to break down the task in order to be able to teach somebody else how to do that. And you not only have to be able to do that for the task, but understand their thinking styles and work preferences and motivations and everything else. And it's the reason why we have our very first circle of suck that many of us can relate
That's
to.
it. That's the one.
For me, it lasted about 3 different years because you don't really realize what you're up against. You're feeling all this pressure, but you don't really know. It's almost like there's a invisible barrier between you and the work getting done. And each time you push and push, this resistance comes back, and you don't know why. You can't figure out the dynamics of it. And
No one can help you with it explicitly because really what you're doing is identity rewiring. And the problem is only you know how you're wired. And so only you know what is going to motivate you to rewire. So, it's kind of why, our job at ThinqShift is really, people say, coaching is such an overused term. I'm no longer using that term because, you know, anyone and their uncle can get certified as being a coach these days. Um, but the best definition that I ever saw was we are facilitators of self-directed neuroplasticity. I know that sounds really heavy and nasty. What it's really saying is we're going to help you figure out how to rewire your own brain because I can't really do it for you. I just, it's what it's good. So when I think the reason why you can't feel like, the reason why it feels like you've got this invisible barrier is because there's going to be 4, 5, 600 things that you're having to go back and say, but I've always done it this way. I don't want to change that. It worked for me. I got promoted. I got out of South Africa. I got to Switzerland. I met my husband. I'm now in London. Why the hell do I want to change that? Right? So all of those things, this is why to me, when we talk about being deliberate, you have to be deliberate in order to want to go through the pain and anguish that's required to get through the circle of suck. And if you don't do it, what actually happens is you fake it, right? You pretend, and that's the road to imposter syndrome.
And that's worse because everybody sees that.
Not only do they see that, it's so damn obvious. You think you're being really clever by trying to hide it, but it's like when my son, right, thinks he's being really smart. Jay thinks he's really smart by saying after dinner, how many chocolate bars do we have left? Right? He thinks he's being really sophisticated, right, in his influencing skills. And for me, it's like completely transparent. No, Jay, you've already had 3 chocolate bars today. You can't have a 4th one, even if it is wonderful Godiva, right? But when you're in that space, you think that you're being really clever and really smart. And even if we don't like our managers and executives, you can bet your life they see those signals. They're not stupid. And we just forget that. It's
Absolutely.
youth is wasted on the young, as they say, and all of our tactics they're much more transparent as we go on. But I want to bring it back, Vicky, to deliberate before we talk about what it means for a superstar performer and deliberate for also managers and executives, because I think a nice easy way to think about it for our audience is that, to me, there's a deliberateness of intention. Okay, it's really easy to say, I have good intentions to be a better manager. I have good intentions to provide better feedback. I have the intention to lose 20 pounds over the next 6 months. I have the intention to run a marathon, right? These things, it's very easy to say that, okay? But you have to get to a place where you're able to take that intention or that inspiration, if you like, and get deliberate about the choices. So yes, it would be wonderful to run the London Marathon when it's allowed to resume. However, am I making a choice to go and run the London Marathon, or am I just going to kind of hold that as something that I can regret 10 years from now having never done? right? Owning that's quite hard.
Well, it's the difference between wishful thinking and being very hopeful about something and making it happen. It's that commitment. It's that purposeful commitment that is a very, very tough place for many people to
Yes.
go to.
So you get from intention to commitment through deliberate choice, and deliberate choice is really accepting the consequences of that choice. If I make a commitment that I want to be a really really good manager, then really what I'm committing to is being less of an expert. And people find that really freaking hard to wrap their heads around.
Well, it makes sense because
Sure.
their value is less tangible. When they were a superstar performer, they could see an output that said to them, hey, I'm successful. I know what this is. Now it's very woolly bits. It's not clear what that really looks like. And that makes people very uncomfortable because you don't really know if it's the right thing. You don't know if it's the thing that's actually being asked of you because it's a lot less. People can't really give you a checkbox of, hey, do all these things and you'll be successful.
That's right. And on top of that, you've had all this reinforcement, brain reinforcement, that everything that you've done so far has been wonderful because you're being rewarded with more money and a promotion. So there's you haven't given your brain any reason to experience pain with anything you've done thus far. So why would you go racing for pain when when everything that's worked for you thus far has worked really well? And ironically, this is going to be more of an issue for the superstar performers who are really superstar performers. Meaning, from a business point of view, these are going to be the people that you thought were your best performers are going to be the ones that are going to have the hardest time through that first circle of suck. And the same thing happens with the manager to top-notch exec as well.
Well, it's why companies like IBM and Microsoft and a lot of the big tech giants have these incredible engineers, and then they get so frustrated when they promote them
Yeah.
to managers, and they wonder why they suck. And it's the reason why a lot of those companies end up with dual career tracks because most of them they should just stay as great individual contributors, as distinguished engineers or architects. Give them a choice because not only do they not know, but often many of them are not very good at it. They don't have those interpersonal and right brain skills that are needed, and they don't want to necessarily spend the time to become good at them.
And many companies are doing that. Like Google, for example, do that. And I think the challenge is more of an internal one, though. Like even if you just accept from an organizational point of view that we'll have dual career tracks, the problem often comes is that people's egos take over, right? Like I only want to do what I'm really good at and be an expert, but I also want to be the CEO, or I want to be the head architect, or I want to be, you know what I mean?
I
Like
do.
you want the glory of the C-suite, right? But because your ego demands it, that's a sign of progression. That's a sign of success. That's a sign of leadership, right? So your ego wants the other path, but you don't really want to do any of the work on the other path. You want to do the work on the current path, and then the issue becomes an economics problem because when you're on that, if you like, the expert career path, really your market value is going to go up and down. If you think of it over a 5 or 10 or 15-year time frame, your value is going to go up and down. Your salary is going to go up and down depending on how hot your skills happen to be. Whereas the other side is way more predictable. Okay. And when push comes to shove, most professionals want a reasonable level of predictability, particularly with regards to their income. And this creates quite a challenge because these are hard things to resolve internally, is my point.
Yeah, and then you add to that societal pressures. So most parents and grandparents understand if you're a manager or an executive that you have people reporting to you, that you're more successful. They don't really understand this expert career track and how, as someone of very senior C-suite level expertise with no people reporting to you, that you can be successful. They just don't get it, Vips. So you feel
Right.
all that pressure of,
It's
well, I
peer
don't have
pressure,
any.
it's family
Yeah,
pressure,
yeah,
it's a
yeah.
cultural pressure, particularly. I mean, we see this a lot in software development, right? I know this from a cultural point of view with our Indian culture. It's, what do you mean you're not a manager? It's like, I mean,
And I think the other challenge, Vips, is not many people truly understand what it means to be a great manager and leader. They can point out all the ones that are not good, but they don't really know what it means to be good in terms of internalizing the behaviors and then understanding the commitments of what it takes to rewire. So why don't we take folks on that journey of what does it look like to rewire ourselves as we go through the different career stages?
So let's talk about what deliberate then looks like, right? In that first phase, that superstar performer phase, I tell you, deliberate to me looks like being really, really focused on what's important for you to master your craft. It's very easy earlier on in your career to be a bit of a sort of a jack of all trades and a master of none. It's you know because it's easy to pick up elementary skills quickly. It's quite hard to become a craftsperson at anything. Okay, so if you don't do that, what's going to actually happen is you don't develop any sufficient significant depth. And so to me, that's a really important part on that superstar performer journey. And being deliberate is just recognizing that whatever you're doing from a job point of view and a functional point of view, it's very, very important to make sure that you are developing sufficient depth in your competency, in your skill set, because your career is going to continue, whether it's in that same organization or in another organization. You want that to be solid foundation upon with which to grow. And if you allow yourself to meander too much earlier on in your career, it can be very difficult to have any kind of foundational expertise if you haven't been very deliberate about cultivating it beforehand.
And if you add to that, Vips, the dimensions of what does it take to be well rounded. So you've got your craft that you've mastered, but things like attention to detail, things like turning up on time, the punctuality, your presence in meetings. They're very specific behaviors that are very, very important as we think about the early part of your career and being a good team player, providing quality work, being able to take information, analyze it, come up with great recommendations. These are very deliberate practices that you would not necessarily have been able to hone in your previous life as a student. And they're not very clearly articulated as to what are all the different areas that are really important. And they can feel somewhat petty when you're 22, 23, 24, 25, and feeling like you should really be advising the C-suite because you don't yet know what it takes to advise the C-suite, and you feel like you can conquer the world. But actually,
It's the invincibility factor.
absolutely, it's a beautiful thing. But if your slides have a mistake, or if the formatting's wrong, or you turn up a little late, or you don't have important points to share in a very impactful way, you've just lost instant credibility. And those are very deliberate practices as a young superstar performer that are equally important to build as you mastering your craft.
Yeah. So then you have that circle of suck, okay? When you're good at what you do, you want more money, the environment promotes you, and it says, there you go, you now have a team of 3 people you've got to manage, okay? And more often than not, you get no sensible management training, right? Someone tells you now you're now responsible for them. Go figure it out. I'm being facetious. Many companies have management trainings and so forth, but they tend to be very formalized around the processes of being a manager.
Yeah, it's how do you recruit, how do you manage
Yeah,
performance, as opposed to the rewiring that has to go on in your brain.
right. And the rewiring that has to go in your brain is really interesting here because this rewiring is okay. So the things that you thought success looked like now change. So in simple terms, um, success looked like in that superstar performer stage. It really looks like do your tasks, do them well, don't screw up too often, and don't wind up too many people. If you do those really well, I don't care what you are. You're a management consultant, you're a marketer, you're a lawyer. If you do those at that stage in your career, you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. But then you get to this awesome manager level, and now it's not you doing your tasks. It's how do you get other people and possibly superstar performers? Like how do you choreograph and coordinate what they're doing rather than doing it yourself, right? Now, so you're not think you're thinking about you're thinking about the collective outputs of your team rather than what you were doing. Then you're also thinking a lot more about results now. Okay, so what's the results I need? Not have I followed the right 16 process. It's not did I do my 5 story points. It's is the value of those 5 story points actually worth it? The result becomes a lot more important than the thing, the tasks.
Well, it's all about success criteria.
That's
And
right.
if you weren't able to see what you did and connect it to the outcomes and what success looks like, this becomes incredibly difficult because you're not able to see the end and what done looks like, and then How do you chunk it up and get to done? What are those
That's
steps?
right.
How do you think 2 or 3 steps ahead? How do you manage 2 or 3 steps ahead
If you can even see it,
if you can even see it?
even if you can even see it, because when you're in that superstar performer stage, you're generally doing things that require high levels of reactivity. This task has to be done this week. This task has to be done in the next 2 hours. This task has to be done in the next 2 weeks. It's very immediate. As a manager, you often have operational responsibilities. You have to think about reporting. You have to think about communication. You have to think about um, morale. You have to think about team spirit. So the big difference here, so deliberateness for a manager is at its core, I have to want to care about people and manage people, as opposed to do my thing that I do really well. And if in that requires a lot of deliberate practice, because what it's going to do is it's going to expose all sorts of habits that you either don't have or are wrong. So, for example, if I'm a superstar performer and I'm a data scientist, then my job looks like coming into work, assuming you can go to work, burying myself in a screen, figure out what regressions I need to do, what data I need to analyze, and I do it. I can be heads down for 8 hours with my headphones on, and that would be perfectly acceptable and fine. Okay. But if I'm a manager responsible for a data scientist team, I can't do that anymore. I can't be closed off to the world with my $400 headphones staring into three screens all day. I have to be talking to my team. I have to be making sure the right projects are being worked on. I have to be making sure people are being mentored. I have to be making sure feedback is being given. So you're not going to do any of that stuff if you internally don't choose to practice those skills. You can't.
And
And what happens normally? Sorry, Vicky, I'll hand over in a sec. What I see happening normally is people just do what they were doing before and think they can make up for all those manager responsibilities on a Saturday morning or a Thursday afternoon between 5 and 7. It doesn't work that way.
yeah, and that's very well said. And if you add to that, not truly understanding what that role is, and the thing you actually enjoyed was being a data scientist, everything in your being is going to drag you back to doing the tasks. And it's very hard for you to take that step away and say, I see value in getting stuff done through others. It just feels so intangible, especially if you're a data scientist. There's nothing coming out of it that feels good. You don't see the tangible results in the same way if somebody's even explained that to you. So it becomes very difficult to get your head around, well, if my role is to build a high performing team and remove the obstacles for the team, well, what does high performing look like? Where are they now? How do I get them there? And actually, if you do really think it through and learn the techniques and tools along the way, there are very structured things you do which are very deliberate. But it's very hard to understand what they are unless someone's helped you understand them or you figured it out yourself.
Yeah, think about it. The data science is a great example, though, because if you think about it, you probably studied for years to acquire the skills to do that. And then you've been doing them, and the world is telling you that the world is moving towards everything. Like everything's about data. Right? Data is more valuable than oil now, apparently. Okay, so if you think of it that way, then why the hell would you let it go, right? I mean, it's such a it's almost like saying, why would I want to go back to grade school and start all over again?
Well, it's because there's not enough talk in organizations, from my experience, of what does it really mean to be a manager? It's more of a, I don't know what those managers and leaders do. It's my time. I want that title and I want the money. And it's literally that simple for most people. They don't fundamentally understand. And it's either because they haven't had experience of these awesome managers who are building high performing teams and stretching and developing them at every stretch of every moment of the day, or they haven't internalized it to themselves to understand the difference between what they're doing. They just think it's a little bit more responsibility. Keep doing what you're doing, have some people, babysit, and off you go. That's what they think in a lot of instances.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably worthwhile also saying that we're kind of we're kind of being a little bit dismissive about all of the hard skills that are appropriate to do as a manager, right? Like when you typically go on manager training, okay, they're gonna tell you about this is how you write a status report. This is how you should do a team meeting. This is the tactics, if you like of managing, the process of managing. Putting measurements in place, putting KPIs in place. These are all good, right? But from our point of view, we're not trying to create fabulous managers. We're trying to create fabulous leaders. So our managers, the awesome managers, have to go above and beyond what would be considered a good manager, if you like, right? And I think that's because what we're conditioning them for the future is, it's going to sound terrible, but it's more than an institutional manager who's just responsible for their little fiefdom. We're conditioning them to become leaders of people rather than keep the train on the tracks. It's kind of like, you can be a great A student manager, but we don't need A students. We need like A plus plus students, and I think that sometimes gets lost. I'm not trying to be dismissive of other management skills, just that these are things that are the hard things. The wiring, the rewiring is the hard stuff that is above and beyond that you can't really do with go and do 20 hours on Coursera and it will figure it out for you. It doesn't work that way, because it's quite deep and introspective.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to be deliberate about, hey, I'm not just going to dip my toe into what this looks like in being a manager. I'm actually going to be very deliberate about looking at all the things that I did before. And is that my job or is that my team's job? And what is my job? And where are the gaps? Where am I currently and where are the gaps? And every 3 to 6 months, looking back and getting feedback from your team and others around you and making that a deliberate choice and realizing it's going to feel kind of tough for a lot of people to do.
Yeah. As you're saying it, I'll tell you the thing that I comes up in coaching conversations with me all the time, and it tends to happen sometimes in the also manager zone, definitely in the top-notch executive zone, which is people have a very low threshold of failure. So in that journey to being a superstar performer, it's actually possible to pretty much get everything right, because your scope tends to be task centric. So as long as you're doing your tasks really well, you can actually be on top of your emails. You can actually be on top of your tasks. You can always deliver your deliverables, whatever they happen to be, on time. Okay. You can feel like you're winning and winning 95, 96, 97, 98, 99% of the time. When you're a manager, you can't, because if you're a really good manager, you know that you're going to take some arrows. You just know it. So having 75% success across the team is doing fabulously well, but it also means that you have to be comfortable with 25% failure. And that's really failure that you learn from. It's not negative failure, but if you've conditioned yourself with a 99% threshold of perfection, right? Then a very, very, very respectable, healthy 75% of perfection and 25% of mistakes, if you like, errors, that's not hard to wrap your head around. And then transitioning to executives gets even worse, because think about your life as an executive. So, you've got through this manager circle of suck, you're in an executive landscape now. And now you really don't have a clue what most of the people in your teams are doing most of the time.
Yeah.
You just don't know. So you might get 50% of things right. You might get, and that's a really, really difficult thing to do, particularly if you were really bright. And if you're the kind of person who went through college, university, never really, got anything less than an A, never really failed at a subject, never did bad, right? That's a real shock to the system that can hit you in one of these. It tends to happen either in the awesome manager or the top-notch exec circle of suck. And that has to be a deliberate decision, that I'm going to allow certain things in my team to go wrong, because on balance, we need to focus on these three things that are going to be more important over the next 6 months.
What you're saying there is really interesting, Vips. I was having this conversation with a client of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he does not like the word failure. He chooses to use the word limited success, because that's his way of rewiring his head around allowing for some of those things that aren't going well, but really focusing in on, we didn't quite get the outcomes we wanted. We got some success, but it was limited. And so for those of you that are those superstar performers and like to get everything right, that could be another way of allowing yourself to take some of those arrows by realizing, whether you call it failure, whether you call it limited success, it's your own interpretation around it, but it's recognizing that as you get more senior, the goal is to help others grow and learn and create their own autonomy. And that means there has to be mistakes. There has to be things that aren't going to go well. or they're never really going to learn. They're not really going to have the initiative.
And this is, if you think about it, right? So now we're in that top-notch exec area. This is really, really tricky because if you think about it, like even in our professional lives, let's say the last 20 years, right? If you think about it, you think about how much more we want to measure and have metrics around everything now. Okay, I mean that's technology and data has given us the ability to relatively efficiently measure most things, whether it's supply chain processes, whether it's performance management processes. I mean, there's so many things that we can measure right now. Okay, that if you think about it, the more measure, if you put measures around absolutely everything, you systemically create an environment where it's unsafe to fail, despite saying it's okay to fail. Okay, so there's a really interesting balance that has to be struck there between how do you create a systemic environment that encourages learning and growth, while also balancing that against business performance and business metrics. Because if you over-index on that, then what you're really going to do is going to make it unsafe to fail, right? But if you overdo it on the learning side, then you're going to have a low performance culture. But I think people don't see it as a trade-off, right? People don't realize the trade-off that they're making, because it tends to be different functional areas, different C-suite leaders, if you like, will take a different position. And generally it's left to the CEO to figure out, okay, what balance am I comfortable with? It's one of those things that, even when I mean, you and I've had this conversation. When I was at Quedis, when we were at Quedis, I was number two, and I never had to really deal with that problem. I could see the view through the lens of people, if you like, and operations, but I couldn't really see it through the CEO's lens because Paramji had to do that. And but with ThinqShift, I find myself in that place all the time, and it's like you get into this place with like, well, okay, I'm having to calibrate that balance between creating a supportive learning environment, but it's also got to be sufficiently performance centric. But I know that if I optimize on over performance, then it's going to be unsafe to fail, and then we won't grow anyone, and then we won't have the next generation of ThinqShifters. And I think this is true for every organization, and this is why I think being deliberate around these sorts of decisions should be the responsibility of great executives. I'd go as far as to say I think most executives don't even think about it, and the ones that do think about it, they go, "Oh my God, that's too hard. Forget it. I'll worry about it another day." It's such a hard thing to deal with if you can't condition yourself to see that as part of your own personal success.
And then if you can, there are actually some really interesting tactics out there. So I've seen one group come up with a wall of lemons where they literally cut out shapes and colored them in. They were yellow. And every time the team had their limited success or their mistake, depending on your preference, they would write the event up on a lemon and put it on their lemon wall. And then they'd have a conversation around it, again, being very deliberate about failure.
Yeah.
And then coming out the other side, either they turned it into a glass of lemonade and it all went swimmingly, or it became compost and it didn't go so well. And so there's very deliberate things you can do, even about the cognitive choice about, okay, what does it look like for me to be okay with a little less perfection in the spirit of growing and innovation and helping the team become stronger? And how do we turn it into learning rather than something that feels heavy and that I cannot accept?
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Hey, when you were talking about the lemons, I thought you were going to say something else. I thought you were going to say they made people eat the lemons every time they were.
Well, Vips, that would have HR issues all over it, especially here in the US. I'm not sure you could do that, my friend.
I thought that's where you were going to go.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah,
funny.
no, you're right. But I think the point I'm trying to get across is that that's an executive responsibility to be able to articulate what is acceptable relative to the culture and the environment that you're trying to create in an organization. And it's very easy. I mean, who doesn't want to be higher performance? Everyone wants to be higher performance, right? It's easy to roll out certain words and certain language when we don't really realize the consequences of what we're saying. And that's not, I'm a big fan of high performance, but that whenever you optimize for something, something else is gonna be less optimal.
Yeah.
because of it.
Well, we're seeing it right now, even with organizations who've been pushing the efficiency agenda with COVID-19. I mean, that's out the window. There's no ways we can be efficient right now. And that's causing a lot of dissonance. And it's really important for them to choose a deliberate posture for the phase we're in right now, whether it's chaos or acceptance, depending on your particular situation. And what is the right way to get through this? But it's not efficiency right now, that's for sure.
Yeah. So those to me, those this concept of deliberate choice and deliberate practice at executives, is it comes up over and over again. Like you're talking about deliberate choice in the context of COVID. I'll give you another one. That's in the context of COVID right now. Is so many organizations are in the process of trying to figure out what their new right-sized workforce looks like. Okay. Now, whether that means layoffs or it doesn't mean layoffs or whatever, right? And it's a good example of a deliberate choice there is, do I optimize knowing that I'm going to have to make a reduction in workforce? Do I optimize for only doing it once, or do I optimize for the lowest number of people that I need to make redundant now? Okay, both, you get a different answer if you do both. And those are the sorts of deliberate choices that leaders have to own, and they go back to principles and values. They tend to go back to principles and values more than they go to right and wrong, if you like. And then you have the other side, which is deliberate practice. So that's the reps. And to me, it's really interesting how the amount we can rewire from a brain point of view through just sheer repetition is absolutely extraordinary. Now, Anders Ericsson, who's the guy who wrote the book on this, on deliberate practice, well worth a read, by the way. This is kind of what was kind of reshaped and popularized as the 10,000 hour rule.
Malcolm
From
Gladwell.
Yeah. But this basic idea that if you do something often enough, you're going to get better at it. Now, there are constraints to that. The constraints are basically genetics. Okay, at some point you're going to hit genetics. But within a professional context, there really isn't too much that we can't rewire. But those do require a high level of understanding your defaults, your triggers, and then choosing to react differently, and then make an active effort to do what we call the brain training practices, the reps. And it's very difficult. Like simple ones I see, you'd be amazed how many executives I see who they need deliberate practice in making good eye contact. Simple as that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it sounds like such a silly thing to say. Number of execs I've said, make a mental note of the eye color of everyone you speak to, and it's like, people think I'm listening now. Yeah, no, yeah, because you're making eye contact now. And even at simple stuff like that, I don't want that to get lost as we get quite deep into some of this stuff.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because I'm thinking back to one of my clients who's probably listening to this, and we had that exact conversation, explaining how important eye contact is, and his response was, "Well, I don't need eye contact." It's like, yeah, for your thinking preference as a very analytical, highly cognitive individual, it's not important to you, but to others who respond in a way that is focused on the relational aspects, it becomes so important.
Yeah.
It feels like I cannot trust you, and it became a very deliberate practice of what does that look like? How do you repeat that idea of making eye contact? And even something like that is incredibly uncomfortable for people if they're not used to doing it.
It's so these deliberate practices. There are, there's all sorts of techniques and tools around how you can practice these over and over again. And to me, where my little soapbox on this is very much, this is where I struggle with personality profiles. All of them, right? It doesn't matter which one. It's not about picking sides, but it's a good example of something that's designed to give you some level of cognitive self-awareness or psychological self-awareness. That's what they're for. They're trying to give you an insight into some patterns that represent the person that you are showing up as. Okay? But 9 times out of 10 in the professional environment, what I see is those tools get abused as a way of either being a crutch for someone and their set of behaviors. They're like that. Their profile says they're like that, so it's okay. Or worse, you say, my profile says I'm terrible at this, therefore I am terrible at this, and I won't even try. And so these things become self-limiting beliefs that get kind of reinforced through our own tools. And I do think that in the world of ThinqShift, where we're really playing around with how you make people change the way they think, it's extraordinary to me when we work with people for an extended period of time and they do genuinely shift the way they think, that what actually changes is their profiles too. It's just that most people don't do that. Therefore, we think that these profiles don't change, right? So the statistics show they don't change, but that's because most people can't be bothered, right? But if you actually, the fabulous few who will change will actually see all their profiles. It doesn't matter which one it is, Enneagram, whether it's Myers-Briggs, whether it's DISC, whether it's whole brain, it doesn't matter, any of them, pick one. They do all change. But what scares me a lot in this world of, I don't know, data and AI and predictive analytics, right, is we are solving for statistical averages, right? But the fabulous few will always be the fabulous few. They're not going to be the average, yeah? And, you know, to me, that's the biggest reason why it's good to be the fabulous few, because you're always going to be in high demand, because the volume is going to decrease, because our tools are going to sort of standardize non-fabulousness. And it's going to become, you know, people are going to know it, they're going to feel it, they're going to see it, but they're going to have a much harder time expressing the why. And that's kind of my hope that executives really listen to that, because that's why we have so many executives and so few leaders.
Yeah, no, that's deep, Vips. And it's what you find in organizations as well, performance management processes or learning and development. It also indexes towards the middle, the average. It doesn't go at the speed of the top fabulous few, and that makes it even harder.
Well, if you think about it, if I'm an HR or talent development department, then I want to optimize for the most people, right?
Absolutely.
It's very, very hard to optimize for the fabulous few, which is why the fabulous few always leave and move around, because they have to take control of their own careers, because the
Yeah.
environment won't do it for them. It's a really interesting challenge, right? But that's also the reason, you know, for our audience, this is why we want you to be fabulous, because you get to write your own ticket.
Yeah, yeah. But to the focus of this conversation, it's a very deliberate practice. It doesn't just happen. It's a choice, it's a commitment, it's a willing to be uncomfortable and get rid of the various elements of your ego that are holding you where you are, and have that beginner's mindset and be willing to go deep and rewire those deep beliefs that you have to operate at the level you're at in the way that's
Yeah.
most effective for your
Yeah,
situation.
it is very, very hard. You know, a simple analogy I sometimes try to give people to make it not feel so daunting and scary is it's a techie one, and it's, just think of it as a core operating. Like, you've got to be willing to go back to your core operating system and do some upgrades. If all you want to do is fiddle around with PowerPoint, Excel, or Google Docs, then you're never really going to do that. If you're going to focus on your core operating system, then that is going to make a difference.
So, Vips, we've gone through the 3 stages of our career journey and what it looks like to be deliberate in terms of rewiring your mindset at each of those 3 stages. Why don't we spend the last few minutes before we close out looking at the rookie mistakes of not being deliberate at each of those 3 phases? So, what happens when you're not deliberate? So, let's start with superstar performers. So, when you're not deliberate as a superstar performer, so I'll give you an example. As a superstar performer, if you're not deliberate about thinking through how do you show up as a superstar performer when you've come in as a student or wherever your journey was before that, you're not going to spend the time and effort to understand what attention to detail looks like and why it's so important to those around you. That's one rookie error.
Yeah, I'll give you another one for a superstar performer. You turn up and you're not deliberate about setting yourself goals or learning objectives. And so what then happens, you just get asked to do anything, and then you feel like you end up doing lots of menial tasks, and you don't feel like you're growing or learning, and then it gets held against you when pay rise and promotion time comes around.
And then the third would be if you don't take the time to master your craft, but you move around and try and do lots of different things and become an expert at nothing. So you've got nothing foundational to anchor your craft off. So, what about managers, Vips? Let's think about the rookie mistakes that people make as a manager of not being deliberate. And I'll kick us off again. So, If you get promoted and you're excited, you've got a title and an office, and you keep doing what you did before, so you are very comfortable at getting something done and you want to do it faster and better than your team that you now have, that's a rookie error because your job is not to do the work in the same way you did before. You're not the content expert anymore. Certainly not what you're being paid to do. You're being paid to build a high performing team. So if you don't slow down and spend the time thinking about deliberately, how do I think about my job differently? You're going to enter that circle of suck in a deep, deep way. Rookie error number one.
Yeah, I give another one that kind of is a specialization of that. Maybe you try to still maintain your high level of expertise more so than the people in your team because you're just going to burn yourself out.
Yeah. And a third one for managers is if you don't do the deep work to rewire how you think about value and what value looks like as a manager and an executive in an organization, and it's no longer related to the specific tactics of doing, you will surround yourself with a lot of bureaucracy and admin and reports because it's going to make you feel important, but it just generates a huge amount of work for others. And to what end?
Yeah, I got one more. I know we're going to do three, but I got four. Teaching. If you don't see yourself as a teacher and an enabler for your team, it's going to go wrong because your team's going to abandon you, and the more they abandon you, the less you're going to be able to scale and grow.
I like it, Vips. All right, so for our top-notch executives, so one that comes to me, Vips, is as we think about your role as an executive, you're now further removed from the end result. You will have a vision, you will have a roadmap of how to get there. But beyond that, it's not really in your control. And if you don't get comfortable with enabling teams and your managers and leaders to really drive forward the outcomes that you've laid out in your roadmap, you're going to want to default back to checking on everything they're doing and asking for more of those status reports and that detail to make yourself feel comfortable. And that's a very, very hard thing because quite frankly, this is when the imposter syndrome kicks in the most.
Yep. I got another one in a variation on that theme as well. I think you have to make a really deliberate decision to understand business rather than functional area. What I think happens is too many executives are very credible at running quote unquote their department or their function or their area, but they're pretty hopeless when it comes to going one or two degrees beyond their functional domain, and that makes for poor collaboration at best and poor business results at worst.
And I'll build on that one, Vips. A third rookie error for executives is that they don't see communication and managing their stakeholders as work. So, building on what you're saying, they focus specifically on the tasks in their department and what needs to get done, but they're not seeing themselves as a steward of the greater business. And what's the level of communication needed with peers and other stakeholders to drive results that is a balance between what they're trying to get done and what's right for the organization. So it's no longer only their agenda.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think that's a wrap for this episode, and we're going to be back next week when we do the third D, which is going to be what does it mean to be dynamic? And then after that, the fourth one will be Seek Discovery, which will be in 2 weeks' time. Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week.